All right, three, two, ready? Three, two, one. Now, what's going on here is that I'm going to do some testing on recording live using obviously video of our audio presentations with some of our syndicators. We have a show that's currently being syndicated by Blog Talk Radio. No, excuse me. I used to be on Blog Talk Radio, being syndicated by Business Talk Radio. And that's part of our relationship with them in Westwood One. And so the purpose of this is to promote the IBGR network. This is where you're looking at it. And what I'm telling you is that I am the first of many hosts that are going to be syndicated. So if you want to know whether or not the quality of production is here and the quality of talent, you don't get syndicated in the radio world if, in fact, you don't have some talent, no matter how much money you may pay. All right. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be doing this. I'm going to give you a little layout. The format they use at Business Talk Radio, which is different than us, is an 11, 9, 11, and 820 format. Now, what that means is that in radio, you have a time clock. And so the time clock says when you're on, when you're off, and when are the commercials going to run or the promotions, whatever they're going to do. So in this particular case, we're running about a 39-minute, 31-second of a broadcast hour through their system. Now, in our system, we're running a 48-minute broadcast hour as opposed to theirs. So we're running about 9 more minutes without commercials. It's just a business decision. It has no validity one way or the other. Okay, so now you kind of know the formats. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be doing an 11-minute show. I'm going to be doing a 9-minute show. I'm going to be doing a 11-minute show, and I'm going to be doing a 8-minute and 20 seconds. And I'm going to just leave it all live, and then I'll talk about what's going on in between. Now, what's going on with this series? We were in negotiations with Business Talk Radio about syndication going back to early this year. And the idea behind that was to begin to use other platforms to promote the IBGR network. And since I have worked in radio and that I had some relationships, in fact, some of the people that they're using in sales to call affiliate stations called me when I was running WNTW in Chester, Virginia. And so we kind of know each other. I'm not from the industry, but I was in it long enough to get a good sense for how it operates. And so what we're doing is we asked them. So this is a hint for everybody out there who would like to get syndicated. And what we asked was simple. If we were to run a show, what would sell with the affiliates? And they came back with really an HR show. Now, you know, if you listen to IBGR, we have all day Thursday. You could kind of call it human resources. Our focus is on people. They also ask us not to reproduce or do a show that we're currently doing. So this was brand new. And so what they were addressing here is where everybody is currently standing with this problem that they all have. And what that problem is that because of the unemployment benefits, there are a lot of people who should be working who are not going to work because they're actually making more money and not working. And if you think about it, it is a reasonably logical decision by them, as much as most of us are abhorrent. And I'd like to think that I would never do that, but who knows? Who knows what I would do in the right circumstance? All right. So the idea behind this was, how do we help the smaller businesses, just like we have here at IBGR? How do we help the smaller businesses get the personnel that they need? So I decided that I would take both a quantity and quality approach. You need bodies to open, no doubt about it. But in the process of getting bodies, perhaps we could get some good ones. And the challenge that you have, and I'm going to do this on the radio so we hear this again, is there is no employer out there who has a nursery out back. And what I mean by nursery is that nobody's growing employees. And so everybody's out there competing for them. And if the good people aren't working for you, it's not that they're not out there. It's they're not working for you. Why are they working for somebody else? So I'm taking that approach. We put together 13 shows to get us into October, and then we're going to put something else together. So this is Real Help Wanted, ... building an all-in workforce is the theme, and that's going to stay with us for the year. Now, today's show is on what is commonly known as a psychological contract. And what that really is there is a a set of unspoken expectations that people have when they go to work for somebody. And it's the same for the employer. And so one of the things that we need to do here is we need to get it all on the table, because this stuff only leads to resentment, people leaving early, and many times it's simply a misunderstanding. Now, just to take you one more step before we get into the recording, and that is where we've been so far is on our first show. This is number 3. Our first show, we talked about this issue of how much of human behavior is nature versus nurture. And I'm an outlier on this topic because most people would say to you, oh, it's like 80-20. 20% is nature, 80% is nurture, in that we all are byproducts of the environments we grow up in. I don't share that view. And I think there's some solid science behind it to say that it's more of a 50-50 proposition. 50% of what you do is genetic, and 50% of that is learned. And so in the first show, we dealt with what we thought was the core of what is genetic, and that is everybody seems to, at some point in their life, have to deal with the issue of why they're there. I mean, if you think about how crazy this is, you're born, you die. When you die, you take nothing with you. Okay, you take nothing. None of your achievements, none of the people in your life, none of your possessions, nothing goes with you. So what is the purpose behind existence if, in the end of the day, it all gets thrown in the trash cans, so to speak? And a lot of people disagree. Will people remember you? Maybe you build monuments to yourself. Good, fine. But you get the point I'm raising. And so all through history, what people have tried to do, and this is one of, if you don't believe in God, but you understand the need for religion, is that the need for religion has always been to answer this question. And of course, good, bad things happen to good people. How do I answer that? But fundamentally, at the core, is why am I here? And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to take advantage of that. Now, I don't mean advantage in a negative way. What I mean is I wanted to take advantage of it in a positive way, is that if everybody is seeking their meaning, what is my purpose in life? Most of us spend 70% of our lives at work. So therefore, the place where most people are going to find their real purpose is in the professional sphere, however you want to define that. Well, if I understand that, now I can also begin to design jobs in a way that I can feed into that purpose. All right, all of you out there who are business owners and entrepreneurs know exactly what I'm talking about. Your purpose is, you're a serial entrepreneur. Your purpose is to create. I have the same affliction. All right, so that's what we did in the first show. The second show, what we did is we took the other side and said, okay, now that we talked about the 50% that's genetic, let's talk about the 50% that's earned. And where we went with this was that really fundamentally the two things on nurture, the two macro categories to consider. Number one is the category of parenting. And each one of us is a function of how we were parented, just like our parents are functions of how they were parented. So that kind of cascades down. And in some place in our early years, our, not childhood, but let's say as we get into adolescence, is that there are crises and events that happen. Some of those are personal to the family, but also a lot of those events are across a country or a culture or across the world. And that between the two, that kind of gives us a sense of who we are and where we stand. So each one of us has a drive for meaning, to define our lives, to live on purpose. The lucky figure it out earlier than the unlucky, who figure it out later, and the truly unlucky never figured that out. But how each one of us go about doing that and what the answer is different to everybody. And that's what we did last week. So if you want to look at that, it's on our blog site. So if you go to ibgr.network and then you go to blog, you'll find these in the blog section. I kept it separate from our show notes. All right, so that should take care of all of that preamble going into it. So from this point on, you're going to watch me do a radio show. So what I'm doing now, and for those of you that are interested in doing something like this, the headset that I'm wearing is a Audio Technica. It's about a $200 set. So it puts it at probably at the lower end of the mid-range. The one thing I will say to you is that this is what if you see somebody at a sporting event, or you're watching TV and they're at a sporting event, this is the rig that they're wearing. The other thing is that I'm using about a $100 mixing board that goes with this. That's it. So for about $300, you can set up a professional setting just there. All right. Now that doesn't mean that that's what you want to do, but it will work for you. All right. So let me see here. I'm going to turn on recording. So what we've got all that, and then we're going to be operating from Audacity is our recording program. And so let's see. Let's open everything up. There we are. There we are. There's Audacity. And the one thing I got to do is I got to keep my eye on the ball here, because since I only have 11 minutes for the segment, you really have got to be on your game, because if you're not on your game, it's going to get ugly. It really is. Okay. So with that, here we go. 3, 2, 1. You are listening to Business Talk Radio. My name is William Eastman, and I am the host for today's show on the unspoken but critical psychological contract that exists between employer and employee. And it's part of our series on Real Help Wanted, building an all-in workforce. Now, if you want to know more about me, here's where you need to go. You need to go to the ibgr.network. That is where my operation's at. I'm the managing partner for a global business talk and news station, currently heard in 177 countries. And okay, that didn't go well. So now here's the option you have to keep recording over, which I'm going to do, and rather than starting and stopping. So let's do this again. Are you ready for this? And then typically, if you haven't done this before, it takes me 2 or 3 takes, and then after that, it just rolls off. Okay, 3, 2, 1. You're listening to Business Talk Radio. My name is William Eastman, and I am the host for today's show on the unspoken but critical psychological contract between the employer and the employee. If you want to know more about me, you can go to my company's website, ibgr.network, where I'm the managing partner of a global business talk news and station that is currently heard in 177 countries around the world. Now, let's get back to today's show. This is part of a series that we're doing, and it's called Real Help Wanted, Building an All-In Workforce. And what I'm doing here is I'm talking to business owners, predominantly business owners and entrepreneurs, but also if you're running an HR function in a smaller company, more than likely HR is a collateral duty, something that's been given to you, and you may be the number 2 person in the company, the vice president, you may be running accounting, but it's given to you as a secondary job. Let me help you do this job a little bit better. All right, so I'm going to start the conversation by taking you to the website where we're at, and that's Biz Talk Radio. That's biztalkradio.com. And then when you click it there, you'll see the show button, and the show button will then take you to my mugshot. And if you open that up, that's where you can listen to this recording anytime you like. All right. So this is show number 3. And by the way, there's a link there in the show notes right there on the podcast page that will take you to our show notes, where I have put it on our blog page on ibgr.network on our system. So if you want to look at the notes, then what you have the ability to do is you can watch us build our ebook, because at the end of the season, 13 weeks, we will have built a book. And if you're with us, we will build it together. Okay, so let's start. All right, so let me get into this thing called psychological contract. Now, psychological contract is, sounds kind of weird, but it really isn't, is that typically in any relationship, there are things that people will state that they want, and there's things that people don't talk about that are just, assumed or are not discussed. And one of the challenges you have, especially in the employment function, is if people come in and they expect one thing and then they don't get it, then that really can sour the relationship. So what I want to do is I want to talk about what is unspoken here. And given what we've talked about in the last 2 shows, so if you remember, what we did is, in the first show, we talked about the fact that we are under the belief, and I can substantiate this with science, but this is not the place to do it, is that human behavior is probably 50% nature. In other words, it's DNA, and 50% nurture, which is the experiences you have growing up. And in the first show, what I did is I took the position of what can we say without a doubt is inbred in everybody. It's part of everybody's DNA, and that is answering the most essential or existential question, and that is, why am I here? I mean, think about this. If you look at this logically, I'm born, I achieve all these things, I have all these relationships, I get all these toys, and then I die, and nothing goes with me. It all goes away. All right? Why? Why would that happen? I mean, if I can't take it with me, why accumulate it? If my accolades or my degrees or the things that I achieve I can't take with me, then why do I do them? Well, obviously we do, but it begs really, not ask, it begs a fundamental question: well, why are we here? And so I have to understand that everybody out there is trying to answer this question. Now, some people are luckier than others in that they get to answer this question earlier in their lives and then they get to work on it. And there are other people for whom this comes too much later and then they have less time to work on it. And then there are the unlucky who never figure it out. And so why are they here? They have no idea why they're here. So that's what we were talking about. Now, last week we said, okay, we've taken, now this is not all of the nature piece. There's far more to it, but we're talking about employment here, not psychology. So now we're going to move over to the nature side. The nurture side. And the nurture, the way I'd like you to look at this, because this is the way I'm doing it, is that it's a function of two things. One is your parents' style, the parental style as they raised you. And understand is that your parents' parental style is the outcrop or the outcome of what their parents used. And sometimes you get replication, other times you get the opposite. And what seems to happen in our society is that one generation has, basically overbearing, overprotecting parents. And then those children are like, man, am I not going to be like my parents? So now they underparent their children, and their children are going, God, I wish I had more structure. So guess what happens? They start overparenting, and it seems like every generation it kind of shifts back and forth. Now, that's not an absolute for everybody, but if you were looking for a generality, it works pretty well. And that's what we did last week. And we finally broke it down to, I can look at generations of people. And because of how they were parented, and plus, what are the events or crises that happen? Because that's the other issue. Now, obviously, all of us have our own little crises that happen within our families, happen with us, but then there are the bigger ones that happen in society. And so what are those events, or I should say, when those events occur, what is our response to that? And that's what makes us all different. So as I'm trying to figure out who I am and why am I here and what would a life lived on purpose look like, I am jaded or controlled or shaded by, how I was parented, and by what the events happened and how I drew meaning from those. And so we talked about that, and basically because those things happen generationally, we can take a look at generations. Now, I'm not huge into the generational stuff because I'm not going to read. There are some people for whom they'll make that integrate with the Bible, War and Peace. I'm not there. But it does make sense that the boomers, Gen B, the boomers, because of their parents were the World War II generation, are a distinct set. Their children, the millennials or Generation X, is a different set in that their children are, their children are, if they're Gen Y, that's a different set. And of course, we got the people who are now under 25, and that set of people. And so what you have is kind of different generations of people all going through who probably had some common parenting styles that they received, and they all went through the same events. And what we did is we talked about what were the differences between them, because, if you're hiring people that are, say, over 55, 56, their work habits, their work ethic is drastically different than somebody's work ethic who is 25 years old. Now, that was true when you and I and the rest of us were 25 years old, because that's what they said about us. They said, man, these people are blah, 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 blah. So I'm not here to dump on any one of those generations, except to say I can draw some general conclusions about them. So it tells me when we get to today's show, a psychological contract, the unspoken expectations, or the word I want to use here is the unspoken obligations that people have toward one another, or they believe the obligation that you have for them. That is what's at play here. And if I'm going to create a killer workforce, if I'm going to get real help wanted, which is quantity and quality, and the quantity is get enough people that I can open my doors and run my business, and the quality is to build an all-in workforce, then what do I need to know? Well, here's a couple things that come into the contract. And as I take a look at the time, we can probably at least get through one of these before we take our first break. And by the way, if you're just picking this up, you're listening to Business Talk Radio. My name is William Eastman, the host for the show. This show, the series that we're running right now is Real Help Wanted, Building an All-In Workforce. And today's show is on the psychological contract, or the easier way of saying it is what is all the unspoken stuff that people expect between employer and employee. How do we eliminate those frustrations of not having that met? Okay. Now, I'm going to be taking it from two perspectives. First one is going to be, what do employees expect of employers? Number one. And number two, what do, employers expect from employees? And usually the stuff does not get treated. It does not get discussed. So let me quickly hit you with those, and then we'll take it to break. So from the employee's perspective, what do they expect from you when you hire them? One is fair and equitable treatment. Number two is that you will exercise reasonable care around their working conditions and the safety. In other words, you're not going to throw them into harm's way. From the employer's perspective, when they're looking at employees, one is loyalty to that employer, that you're not going to go work for a competitor. Let's say you take a second job. You're not going to work for a competitor. Two, that you're going to protect the confidential information that you gather inside the company. And then number three, you're going to exercise reasonable care in the performance of your job. When we come back from the break, I'm going to take these and I'm going to break these apart in greater detail and really talk about what we can assume is going to happen there. And I got some great research behind this, which I'm not going to cite. I'm just going to talk about my experience. So here we go. Don't go anywhere. We will pick this conversation up after a short break. You're listening to Biz Talk Radio. The series is Real Help Wanted. The show is Understanding the Unspoken Contract. And I'm your host, William Eastman, and see you in a few. All right. So for everybody out there, I'm not going to stop the recording. It's just going to go ahead. That is our first 11-minute segment, and I'll edit that down here in just a second. So you get a sense of the flow. Where I'm going to go now is I'm going to take the contract stuff. I'm going to go in more detail, and I've got solid stuff that I've used for years for motivating people. Okay, and so with that, that's what we're going to do. So let's do the countdown. 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's pick up the conversation where it ended. You are listening to Business Talk Radio. The series is Real Help Wanted. The show is Understanding the Unspoken Contract, or better, Psychological Contract. And I'm your host, William Eastman. All right, now we're back. And this is our second segment. And where we left it off is we were talking about this unspoken set of expectations that people have, almost an obligation. And what I hit you with before we went to the break is that employees, when they go work for you, have a set of expectations that most of the time they're not going to speak to. They're not going to put out on the table for you, especially if they're younger or they're fearful because they really want the job. Sometimes it's stuff that people really cannot enunciate. In other words, it's kind of there, but they can't really they can't wrap their tongue around it to say, here's what it is. And so they believe that the employer is obligated to do a couple things. Fair and equitable treatment, number one. And number two is that they have exercised reasonable care. In other words, when I put you on the job, I've really thought about working conditions and job safety, and I haven't put you in a hazardous position. We'll pick up on that in just a second. Now, from the employer's standpoint, as an employee, there are obligations I believe that you have to us, okay? So one of those is loyalty to me as the employer. In other words, if you work for a particular company, you're not going to go work if you need a second job. You're not going to work for the competition. You're simply not going to go do that. Number one. Number two is that any information that you gather about this company, and you will because of our processes, if I'm reasonably transparent, I may share some financial numbers with you, is that this information is confidential. and that you are not going to talk about it. Now, my recommendation would be to have an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, but I don't want to get into that level of detail. Suffice to say is what you learn in the company, I have an expectation you're not going to share with other people. And then the third one is that just like you expect me to have reasonable care about how I set up the job so the working conditions are as good as I can get them, and that the fact that the job safety is there as much as I can do, well, that I expect you to practice the same thing. I expect you to work hard, and I expect you to be safe and act safe. And it shouldn't be something that I have to kind of beat into your head about, you need to be safe. Well, no kidding. All right. So let's get into now the stuff. You may have heard this from other people. Maybe you haven't, maybe you haven't. The stuff I'm about to do, I don't think you're going to get anyplace else. Yeah, because I think we got a particular spin on this that is different than everybody else. Okay, so let's talk about this more than just good feeling generalities, right? Because all that is generalities. There's nothing there that is like mom and apple pie. There's nothing there to disagree with. All right, so what do I do with it? All right, so let's take this to the next level. And what I want to do here is I want to take this and I want to put it in two categories. And I'm going to be talking as the employer to the employee. Now, I get benefit from this list as the employer, but I am not going to be talking about it from an employer perspective in terms of what I want. I'm going to be talking about it as an employer, looking at the employee and saying to myself, if I do the following, I have got this one done. I can check this box off. In fact, I can put a couple checks in the box. All right, so let's go. And the way we're going to start this, the two categories are a list of things that dissatisfy people. In other words, this doesn't make them excited. This usually does not make them motivated. But what it is it makes them unhappy with you. And if you're trying to build a motivated workforce, an all-in workforce, this is the list of things you got to knock down if you're going to do that before you can get over to all-in. All right, so I have 8 items here. I'm going to talk briefly through them, and then we'll start in. So I have here job safety, working conditions, job security, compensation, working hours, policies and procedures, interpersonal relationships, and direct supervision. Those are all things that are absolutely critical for me to attend to. And these are easy to deal with, especially if I've got policies and procedures in place. If I've got an employee handbook or manual, I can knock a lot of these down. So the first one on job safety, really what this is about, as the employer, have you done all that you can do to ensure that when somebody does this job, performs it, that they're safe? Now, we all know that there are some jobs that are dangerous. So it doesn't mean that if it's a dangerous job, let's say you run a tree service company and you got to put somebody up in the tree, that's dangerous, okay? There's no way to mitigate the danger except that you have safe practices. So you've done all you can do to make it hard for somebody to get hurt. So there are jobs that are dangerous. Everybody knows that if they take that job as a dangerous job. The question is, have you done what you could do about it? Number 2, working conditions. Now, this is a step up from safety because in safety, people worry about living or losing a limb. Here, it's more of, what's the conditions I work in? Is it a clean environment? Is it a dirty environment? What is how do we handle the seasons? In other words, am I in a place where it's summertime and, like in Central Virginia where I'm broadcasting from right now, and it's 90 and I'm working in an unventilated, unconditioned place? Not a whole lot of fun. And so what have I done around the working conditions to do the best I can do? And again, this is not about, I got to make it perfect. What I have to do is convey, when people look around, you've done what you could do. There are things of a job. If you've got a manufacturing job in a large plant, it's not going to be air conditioned. You got to have good ventilation. It's going to be hot as hell. Period. End of story. All right. Everybody knows that. But have you done what you could do? The next one is job security. And job security really means that if I take this job, can I rely on this job? Can I, in fact, say, hey, I can go out and, let's say, in 3 or 4 months after I've been a while and I've been established, and let's say I come off of probation, that I can go out and get a loan, I can rent, I can get a car and get a house, whatever. So I need some sense of security. And, one of the rules that I've always used is that if I do not have 6 months of salary in the bank for a particular position, I won't fill it, because I think it's totally unfair to the person 3 months later going, you know what, we ran out of money, your job's gone. Well, what have you just done to that individual? See, you've broken the psychological contract. You hire somebody on, what are they thinking? It's not a matter of, well, it's a guaranteed job. It's a guaranteed job if I do my job. All right. Let me see here. Getting close to our next break. I think I can get compensation in. Let's talk about compensation. All right. Compensation is what's the package? What's everything? You're looking at salary or wages, depending upon how you're paid, whether you're on salary or you get paid by the hour. You're looking at the benefit package, and then you're looking at anything else like profit sharing, commissions, things of that nature. So it's a total package. And you're making two comparisons. The first comparison that you're making is for what the job is asking me to do, what the job is demanding that I do. Is this fair compensation for the demands? Then number two, I'm making another comparison about how does this compare with other positions? In other words, if I didn't go to work for you, I went to work for somebody down the street, how would this package fare against that package? And so that's basically that's where we are with compensation. Now, the one thing I'll tell you is kind of my HR trick, and then I think I should take us to break here, and we'll come back, and in our third segment I'll pick this up and pick up the pace a little bit, and that is just never forget this: salary or wages, what you're going to pay them, is a recruiting tool. Benefits is a retention tool. If you want performance, you got to pay for it. Think sales. And someplace in this series, we'll talk about flexible compensation and basically having people who are not, and think about this for a second, having nobody in the company with all fixed compensation. In other words, everybody with a guaranteed check. I want everybody in my company to receive some portion of their check as variable. The more they perform, the more the company performs, the more they make. All right? Just keep that in mind. So with that, let's take ourselves out to break. All right, so don't go anywhere. We will pick this up in just a couple seconds, or a couple minutes after this short break. So you're listening to Biz Talk Radio. The series is Real Help Wanted. The show is Understanding the Unspoken Contract, better known as a psychological contract. And I'm your host, William Eastman, and I will be right back. Don't you go anywhere. All right, everybody on the air, is that I'm timing this. That's about a 9-minute segment. So that's where we are there. All right, so what we're going to do now is I'm going to take it over. And by the way, if you're interested in any of this, go to our website, ibgr.network, and go to the blog and open up. It says Biz Talk Radio. I think it should be the top post on our blog. All these notes are there. And what we're doing is we're putting it in the blog as opposed to putting it in the putting that in the show notes. I don't want to contaminate the two, because one of the relationships that we're building here with Biz Talk Radio is what we do for them is separate from what we do at the station. So this is a show you will not hear on IBGR. We could do it, but we're not going to. All right. Okay, so let's go. So when we come back from the break here, I'm going to pick up the compensation, and I'm going to go to working hours, and I'm going to finish up on what you would call as all the satisfiers. In other words, if I think all of these through, and I have an answer for all of this, I can arrest all of the unspecified, unspoken expectations. Now, when we get down to the generations, I'll talk about each one of those so I can hone it in a little bit more. But fundamentally, if I put together a good onboarding process, I can make sure that when somebody starts with me, there are nothing unspoken, undiscussed, and that the psychological contract of what they expect from me is as close to reality as it can be, because that's the goal. And what I expect from them is as close to reality as possible. That's what we're looking to get to. All right, let's take this out. Let's start again. And by the way, a cup of coffee probably works. Okay, 3. I better get my notes in front of me. I'll tell you a secret here before I go back in the show. I don't care how many times we've done a show. If you're going to do this, have notes for your in and out. So there are times when you don't want to think. When you get into the body of your show, you can flow. That's what I try to do. But on the in and the out, you want no flowing. What you want is, I want the script written. Okay. 3, 2, 1. And we're back. You are listening to Biz Talk Radio. The series is Real Help Wanted. The show is Understanding the Unspoken Contract, or even better, what is the psychological contract between the employer and employee? How do we get that right so I don't have people expecting what I'm going to do as the employer that they don't get, and making sure that they understand what I expect of them and what's not unspoken, so that we can build a good relationship fast. My name is William Eastman. I'm the host for the show. And so let's get going. You can find this show on you can find this show on Biz Talk Radio. That's BIZ talkradio.com. And if you go to shows, then you'll see my mugshot there, William Eastman. You can click that, and you can listen to this podcast. You can download it. Now, your other option is there's a link there, or you can go to our home website, ibgr.network. When you get there, go to the blog, and the show notes are there. So you get it either from Biz Talk Radio or from IBGR. You can get these notes. And if you get these notes, understand what's happening. You will be participating in the writing of an ebook, because this is what I'm going to, at the end of this, I'm going to have a 13-chapter ebook on this topic, and it's just the start. Now, where we left off, we were talking about taking this unspoken expectations and detailing them out. So we're working on the ones that would be considered dissatisfiers. In other words, if I don't address these issues here, if I don't understand them and address them, then I'm never going to really get an all-in workforce. So I got to get this stuff out of the way so I can move to the next list. And we had 8 items, and we talked about job safety, working conditions, job security, and we ended at compensation. And what we said on compensation was pretty simple, is that people are going to look at it from two lenses. Number one, for what you're asking me to do, how does my salary or wages, benefits, and any commissions or profit share, any of that, how does that weigh against what you're asking me to do? And then number two, how does that weigh against other people in the environment who are basically doing the same thing, okay? Now, next one is working hours. Now, this is going to be an interesting one, because we've got some separation here. And in working hours is what's normal and what's abnormal. Now, there are some populations of people, some generations, for whom this is less of an issue. The boomers, the Gen Bs, the boomers, this is less of an issue. Where if you go to Gen Y, that population of people, what you're going to find is it is far more significant to them. It really is. And why is it more significant to them? Well, that's pretty simple, because what they are, where they're at, is they're looking for more work-life balance, which is not something that, unfortunately for me, I hate to say this, but for people like me and you, if you're a generation, if you're a boomer, that has a less priority, because we believe that work-life balance is somewhat of a myth. All right. You don't have to agree with that. That's just giving you an observation. But the work hours is generational. So what I want to do is I want to say a couple of things to people about what is a normal workday here like. What is an abnormal workday like, where they have to do increased hours? How does that happen? How do jobs get assigned? In other words, do I get to opt out if I don't want to work overtime or extra hours? Or is that really part of the job? Now, what you're trying to do is you're trying to address issues right now and get them out of the way. They're probably not deal breakers. If somebody is really not into working a lot of overtime, and you're talking about working overtime, well, you may lose them here, but I doubt if you'll lose them, because they're in and they're kind of already in the system. On the other hand, is if this doesn't get discussed in this fashion, and then you start dumping a lot of overtime on them, they're probably going to quit. So one of the things that I'm getting at here is that this stuff that goes unspoken is dangerous, because it typically gets blown out of proportion, and it becomes reasons why people, for example, quit working for you, and it should not have happened. All right, now, policies and procedures. Every company should have an employee manual. This is where you're going to basically lay this out. And what the employee manual is, every company has to develop policies and procedures, standard operating procedures, position descriptions. You got to do all that. You cannot build the infrastructure of the company. You cannot build a company that's going to grow if these are not in place. And so my thing is write an employee manual and make sure they read it. And as part of the onboarding into the company, answer the questions they got. You know what areas you want to highlight. Talk about those and allow them to also go, well, what about this? What about that? And then what you can do with that is use that to have a conversation. What you don't want is people not knowledgeable. And this is where it comes to bite you in the backside. And that is, you know what they are. They don't know what it is. They violate it. You hold them accountable for something they were unaware of. Now, you can make the case that that's their fault, and you'd be right. And I tell you what, that is not a victory worth winning because of the situation it creates. In this case, kind of like we did the same problem you have with a customer when you're dealing with a customer, and the customer is absolutely wrong, and then you work very, very hard to prove to the customer that they're wrong. That doesn't come out well because you know what they're going to do? They're going to go down the road. All right, 2 left before we move on to the positive side. So you got interpersonal relationships, number 7. And that is, what is it like in their work groups or teams? Right? Is it fairly supportive? In other words, when they go in there, people are going to help them develop and learn and kind of help them integrate? Or is it kind of a dog-eat-dog environment where, you're fresh meat and for a while you're going to get run around? Now, a couple things here. One is, if it's dog-eat-dog, you may want to reconsider what you've done with the culture of your business because it's probably not productive long-term. But in the short term, if that's the case, then get them up to speed. Now, each company has kind of its own culture, which affects that. So, for example, in the sales organizations that I've worked in, it is kind of dog eat dog. And it's reasonably appropriate because everybody's competing for commissions. So you're going to hire hard chargers. You're going to hire people who understand if they don't kill something, they don't eat, and that is going to permeate the sales department. But that might be appropriate there, but that's not appropriate in other places in the company. So I want to at least alert people to what's going on in the environment they're going in and how can I help them make a more successful integration. And then the last one, what is the nature of their relationship with their supervisor? And this is going to be critical when we get into some of the generations. Some don't care, and for others, this is the game. And so the way I would say to you is, how do your people in your business who are in leadership positions, how do they lead and manage? And the big thing here is do they live what they talk about? In other words, are they leaders who basically say to people, do as I say, not as I do? That's a non-starter. Or are these individuals who basically are, they walk the talk? That's number one. And then number 2, do they have a predilection? Do they have an emphasis, a focus, an objective? Do they see this as positive, that their job is really to train and develop people so that they're fully competent for the job? This is where I'm coming from. In other words, my goal with any employee is I want skill mastery. I want, when you're in that position, and it requires 3 or 4 skills to be sufficient, to be good in that position, I expect you to master that. And I expect the people in the leadership positions to help you master it. If you don't master that, you're not long for my organization. Okay, so lucky for you, you don't work for me. All right, so I think that kind of gets me to where I need to go here. So let's close this out. And then what we do when we come back for our last segment is that we're going to be talking about the positive one. And there are 6 there. And I'll see if I can pick up the pace, okay? And so if you notice that the original list, the 1, 2, 3, 4, and I did them in an order that I've seen it develop, are inward. Once you take care of the inward issues that are internal to them or to their family unit, now they start worrying about things outside of them. What's going to happen here is we're going to have the same mix when we move forward. And so all I'm saying is, on the things we just discussed, adequately address them. That's it. The scientific word for this would be suffice, but adequate works as well. All right. So with that, I greatly appreciate everybody who's been with me and listening. And so you're listening to Biz Talk Radio. The series is Real Help Wanted. The show is understanding the unspoken contract between employer and employees, or better known as a psychological contract. My name is William Eastman. I'm your host, and I'll be right back. Okay, so now we've done 3 segments, and now we're coming down to the 8 minutes and 20 seconds. And so I've got Audacity on right now, and I'm kind of monitoring the time. It may not be exactly accurate, but then I have the ability, because this is a podcast, to go back and add or subtract. Now, the thing I'm not a podcast guy. I'm much better live. If I was doing this live, this would flow for me a little bit better. But that's just how it goes. So I think you see what you got here. If you got any questions, you want to know anything about this, the easiest thing to do for you would be to send me an email, programming@ibgr.network. That's programming@ibgr.network. And I'll answer any questions you got. The show notes are there. You go to ibgr.network /blog, and then you'll find this show there. All right, so let's get us ready to roll. We've got to roll into our next piece. It's going to be 8 minutes and 20 seconds long. All right, so here we go. All right. 3, 2, 1. You're listening to Business Talk Radio. The series is Real Help Wanted, and the show is Understanding the Unspoken Contract Between Employer and Employee, or better known as a psychological contract. I'm your host for the show. My name is William Eastman, and now let's pick up the conversation where we left it off. And so today's show, just a quick overview, is we're talking about the psychological contract, which is something that exists out there in the employment world, and it's nothing more than you having a set of expectations of what I'm going to do, which means those are obligations that I have to meet with you, and that I have a set of expectations as the employer when I hire you, which means you have a set of obligations to me. The challenge that you have is almost never is this recorded anywhere. It's unspoken. And when it's unspoken, what happens is it usually festers because you're not getting what you want as the employee. I'm not getting what I want as the employer, until there's a blow up, and then suddenly we're having a major fight, a conflict. You quit, I fire you, over things that are probably preventable. And into the current environment we got, you cannot afford not to have employees, right? I mean, you're trying to open, especially if you run a service-based company, you're trying to open, you can't get anybody come to work because the government's paying them too much money to stay home, which is, I wish we were doing a show on economics, because I would be knocking this down really, really hard. So, but let's let that one go. And so what we did up till now is we talked about what those obligations were, and we went through a list of 8 items that are part of why people are not satisfied in an organization. This is not a plus. If you do the things that we discussed, and if you want, you've got 3 other podcasts here as part of this series in this show here, where you can go get that information. Here, what we're going to be talking about is, all right, I've adequately addressed those. So then where is the upside? All right. So now let's move to the positives. And as I just said, we can start with the previous list of 8 distractors that make it difficult to focus on the positives. All you got to do is adequately address that. Most of these can be done in the employment conversation, so that what you've done by doing this, it's kind of a carpet bombing, but you've addressed everything that possibly could come up. All right. And where we're going to end this is I'm going to talk about what the generations have. All right. So now here are the 6 I'm going to be talking about here: challenging work, growth opportunities, training and development, responsibility and delegation, promotions, and informal and formal rewards. All right. So let's go challenging work. All right. How do I set up jobs that I demand people use all their talent? And what the employee wants to hear, especially in some of the generations, certainly true, is that we try to make this work as demanding as possible. Not impossible to do, not dirty, none of that, but really is that we are going to push you to have good days. We're going to push you to develop your talent. And that's one of the things that we're going to do. All right. So this is one thing that's going to happen here. You're going to get challenging work. Now, what does that look like? Well, number 2 is that we provide growth opportunities. In other words, we try to make sure that there are almost no dead-end jobs around here where you're going to be doing the same thing 10 years from now. I mean, there are some people for whom that's cool, but most people that's not cool. And you need to decide whether that's somebody who's happy 10 years later doing the same thing they did 10 years ago is happy with that. You want them. All right, that's your call. It's not one I'm on board for. And so that what that means then, there has to be a lot of cross training. You're going to have to look at somebody and how can I refresh your job? Well, my experience is it's easy for the first 5 years to do this. It gets a little bit more difficult after that. But if I can keep somebody performing at a high level for 5 years, I've done a pretty good job, I think. So that's growth opportunities. Number 3 is training development. Is that one of the focuses of the organization, and especially the leadership team, is they see themselves as trainers. They see themselves as developer of talent. And again, I go back to my mantra, so this could be my personal bias, right? Skill mastery is the game. I have solved so many personnel problems in the companies that I've been in by making sure that people were fully competent for their positions, because when they're not, other things occur in the work environment. And I learned this from being a first-line supervisor. I learned this from being a manager. And I learned this from being a vice president of HR. I didn't have the job for long because I was in a temporary position so that we could hire somebody to take it over. However, I did have the job. All right, number 4, responsibility and delegation. Now, really what this is about, if I'm fully competent for the job and I've got this wired, then you're going to give me more and more responsibility. Well, do you give me the autonomy to do that? Do I have the authority to do that? So that, hence the delegation. The quickest way to burn somebody up is give them the responsibility, but not the authority to get the job done through other people. That is pretty dangerous. So what I'm looking for, as I'm getting better, I expect to get more and more of what we would call the load. And I expect more and more delegation from you so I can use my talent to figure out how to do it, because I can probably come up with a better way of doing it than the last person, or you can. And that's a great challenge. Now, number 5 is promotions. And with this one, I think really in a smaller business, where you need to be with this one is think about what your philosophy is on promotions. How are you going to promote people? All right, you're going to promote. Are you going to promote from within, or are you going to hire from outside? And so I'll give you my rule of thumb, 75-25, is that 75% of all of your hiring as you or promotions should come from internal people. Well, if you're not training and developing, you're not doing any of the things that we talked about the previous 4, this is going to be difficult to do. But what I want to do is I want to say to everybody, as this company grows, you got a great future if you stay with us. If you perform and stay with us, you got a great future. Now, the 25% from the outside, let's say that we're going to get into a business we haven't done before. It requires some technology. I'm going to go out and get some subject matter experts because we don't have it inside. Number 1. Number 2 is that I do want to bring in a little bit of some new blood in certain circumstances, because I may want to begin to shift the culture of the company a little bit. But have that conversation with them and write up. And if you're a startup company, don't be fearful of it. You fully intend to grow the thing, and you can preface it by saying, you can't hold me to it because I don't know where we're going to be when we get there, but here's how I intend to do it. Done. And then the last one is both formal and informal reward systems. In other words, how much do you celebrate performance in the company? And on formal is what do you do in terms of commission, bonuses, things of that nature when either the company's had a great year or a person has had a great year or a great quarter or a great month. Do you do anything about it? And in some of the populations with the boomers, not so important. You get some of the younger generations, this is the game. All right, so where I want to leave this here right now with you is that gets us down to the 4 generations. Gen B, Gen X, let me see here, Y. And I'm going to my notes here because I did not put it on the sheet because I didn't want to go through something we already talked about. So let's do the generations. Gen B. All right, so Generation B, the boomers, is 57 to 75 years old. If you got any 75-year-olds in a work environment. But for them, what is in the psychological contract? Here you go. You emphasize your optimism about the company's future and their role in it. That the level of work challenge now and in the future. That the boomers need challenge. They love challenge. They love to be tested. And this is a place that they can make and leave a mark for as long as they want. Now, there's not too many boomers left in the workplace, but this will get the boomers. This is where their unstated, unspoken psychological contract exists with you. Now, for Gen X, what is that? You want to emphasize the quality of the leadership of the firm, the importance to the company of achieving a work and life balance. It's important to them. So how do you make decisions as a company of what work you take and which ones you pass up on? How do you hand out overtime? So for the people for whom this is big, you're going to address it. You're going to say, yes, we are concerned. For the people like the boomers, I don't care about this stuff. You want me to work? You're going to pay me overtime? You pay me double time, I'll show up. I'll show up naked, okay? How the policies and procedures were kept simple. These people, the Gen X, are not big on bureaucracy, so keep everything pretty simple. Basically, the way I explain it to them is read the book. We want to address the few things you can't do, or the few things you're required to do because maybe the law or something like that. And we're much more flexible and informal than it appears, which is always true in a smaller business, especially. Okay, and the last thing I want to conclude with this population is we're going to rely on your knowledge of tech to make everything work. All right, so we recognize that you're technically savvy, which is for the following generations is also true. And the Gen X is 45 to 55 is usually what's considered there. All right, let's go to the Gen Y. And we're talking about 26 to 44, roughly. Emphasize flexible work conditions. What is your policy on remote work? They're going to be very interested in it. And it's also important to them with work-life balance. As a matter of fact, when you start with Gen X and work your way down, work-life balance is an issue. Address it. Have a way of dealing with it, okay? The Gen Y is also big in celebrations. These people are used to being praised all the time by their parents. Well, they haven't changed, okay? And finally, you are very collaborative in your approach to running the business. And then finally, with Gen Z, the last population, and that is, and Zs are 20 up to 25 years old, emphasize the desire to build a real inclusive work team. They're inclusive and diverse, and all that is important to them. So how do you go about doing that? And of course, you and I can have different definitions of inclusive. Mine is not based on gender or color or national origin. Mine's based upon thinking. I love diversity of thinking, not because if I've got a rainbow coalition of colors and they all think the same way, I'm not doing well. The company cares about their well-being, okay? We demand ethical leadership. This is really big with the Gen Zs. And our leaders do walk the talk. They do not play the game of do as I say, not as I do, and that we're fairly transparent in the operation of our business. Okay, so let me conclude it there because we're probably getting down to the end of the time. If you want the notes, your choices are go to Biz Talk Radio, and that's BIZ talkradio.com. And when you get there, go to shows. You'll see my podcast, and there's a link that'll take you over to my blog page. Or you can go to ibgr.network. When you get there, go to the blog. And what you'll do is you'll see this show. And what this show is it's right there. It'll say Biz Talk Radio. So with that, I greatly appreciate you being with me. Next week, where are we going next week? And that's what I want to close on. And next week, what we're going to be talking about is, all right, everybody, see, you caught me there. And this is where I'm going to do an edit. See, now if I was live, I would be in trouble. But since this is recorded, I can come back to it. I didn't have the notes in front of me. And next week, our show next week is going to be Attract the Best by Appealing to Their Aspirations. Have a great business week. If you need anything from me, programming at ibgr.network. This is Eastman, out. All right, so there we are. So what you got, what I have recorded with all the stuff that we did is I have about 9 extra minutes in there. So I've got a little editing to do. But what I wanted to do is, one, is test out what we're doing here. We're going more and more to live shows on whether it's Facebook, LinkedIn, and we're using a combination of Zoom and StreamYard. So I wanted to put this into our YouTube channel so that you get an understanding of what's going on. And quite frankly, I've been reluctant to get in front of the camera simply because I'm a radio guy. All right, you can see I got the headset on, anyway, you got it. So I appreciate you. If you're watching this, I appreciate you watching it. Please, if you got any questions or comments, you definitely can put them on this page. But go to me directly, programming. That's programming with 2 M's at ibgr.network. And hang around the website. Here is more stuff there than you'll ever find. If you're a business owner or you're thinking about starting a business, you're an entrepreneur, I'll tell you what, there's over 2,200 pages of show notes. If you go to ibgr.network and you get to the navigation bar, you see notes and click that, there's over 2,200 pages of notes. I don't know what topic you would have related to starting, growing, or exiting a business you won't find there. You got it? All right. On the bridge, this is Mr. Eastman. I stand relieved.